Hey, do you guys want to see something wacky? There's this up-and-coming politics slash Valorant streamer called Hasanabi, as I understand it. And it turns out that he had Marianne Williamson on stream recently. Isn't that cool? Who's that person? Nah, it's not important. Don't worry. Don't worry about who he is, okay? Anyway, the reason I want to take a look at this is because, as some people have indicated to me, it seems as though they actually had an argument or two, and I'm very curious.
Because as the president, potentially, you will have a lot of powers. What do you think some of the greatest hurdles will be in undermining or completely rewriting a neoliberal organization of the economy?
Well, first of all, every president, no matter who, is hoping for a House and Senate that is aligned with their thinking. So that will make a huge difference. But even if you don't, you do have the power of executive orders. You have the power of the appointments of heads of agencies. You can certainly get rid of the corporatists who head the agencies in too many cases, even if you can't quite bring in the problem solvers.
We have to keep acting like she's a serious candidate? Like, for the presidency? No, of course she's not going to win the presidency. But it's nice to have her go around doing a media circuit talking about, like, you know, valid stuff we need to consider.
Depending on what they block and don't block, and you have the bully pulpit. And also, we all know that this needs to be an outside-inside strategy. So I think the revitalization of the labor movement, organized labor right now, is one of the biggest things going on. So one of the things they would really know that they had a partner in me, whether it has to do with beefing up the National Labor Relations Board, whether it has to do with the PRO Act. To me, that inside-outside elements would be fortified by our presidency.
So you're interested in beefing up the NLRB and giving more power.
Didn't she recently say something anti-vax? That was like a decade ago. No, as I understand it.
Workers so they can unionize.
Yeah.
What do you think about the strikes that are currently going on all around us in Hollywood? I mean, you've spent.
I was on the picket line the other day.
Oh yeah, I saw. Yeah, that was great. What's your opinion on that as far as what's going on with the
course, well, there are two elements, and one element, of course, is the same with Starbucks. It's the same with Amazon. It's the same with the grad workers at certain schools, et cetera. And that simply has to do with how baked into the cake it is that stockholders and CEOs and their stock dividends and their stock buybacks, this profound and really immoral transfer of wealth into the hands of a very tiny few, under the canard that they would create jobs. Of course, their business model is not job creation. Their business model is job elimination and worker exploitation. So it's very...
Didn't her ex-worker basically come out and say she's using it as an extended book tour? Yeah, I have kind of two minds on that. On one hand, if you are running for the presidency, you have to take it seriously as a presidential race, because otherwise you're being kind of deceitful to people who donate or promote your campaign. On the other hand, she's not going to become the president, so if she decides to limit her engagement to what she is capable of doing, which is advocacy, promotional stuff, and a book tour, then I can understand that end goal, you know?
Fantastic. You know, the response of the first Gilded Age was the establishment of organized labor, and the response of the second Gilded Age, which we're living in, is its repudiation. I think it's extremely important. Now, in addition to that, you know, when I would do interviews, and before SAG-AFTRA got in, and it was just the writers, they were talking about things like a writer used to be hired to stay for the duration of the development of the script, right? And then they started doing this thing where we only need you for scene 1 and scene 3. So then that writer has to go work somewhere else to see if there's a scene 2 or scene 4 that he can work on, or she. And of course, this is also to the denigration of the product itself. So that's, first of all, just the dignity and the living wage issue and the decency, all of that. We understand all of that. But with a SAG-AFTRA thing, this is this added element of AI. I mean, it's extraordinary.
Cruelty Squad? Oh, that's what we need right now. There we go. This is really adding to the aesthetic experience.
Or you could take that they make you sign away in perpetuity your image that they could use in another movie. No, it's terrible. And I think Fran Drescher is doing a bang-up job, and I think she's making it clear. You know, during the last campaign, Andrew Yang had written a book, The War on Normal People. And that was the first book that I read that actually I got it about the threat of AI. And I remember one of the things that he says in that book is, don't kid yourself. You might think you have a job where only you could do it. I mean, even like lawyers, they're talking about that now. Don't bother to go to law school because of all of that. So I think...
But Andrew Yang's solutions were, not necessarily great, in my opinion.
Definitely. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm just talking about the whole issue of AI. And I think, and fencing it in and realizing what a threat it represents. And not only to the issue of work, this could be bigger than that. So I think with SAG-AFTRA, particularly adding the AI issue, it's important for all of it. And I think that what people are realizing, what I hope people are realizing, people need to realize is that don't think this doesn't apply to you if you don't work at Amazon, or doesn't apply to you if you're not a writer, it doesn't apply to you if you're not a barista. It applies to all of us whose lives have become which is the vast majority of us, whose lives are the effect of this vulture capitalism and what it has become in this country.
Yeah.
Found him. Back
Speaking
alive.
of Andrew Yang and unique candidates or outsiders, you yourself are an outsider.
Outside what?
Outside of the DC mouthpiece, corporate lobby
System
influence.
as it is, status quo that has taken us to where we are.
There's another person who claims to be. There's another person who claims to have outsider status, but of course is from like a political lineage family. I'm of course talking about RFK Jr. What are your thoughts on his campaign so far?
There's one place where he and I agree, and it's the only place where I've found that we agree. We certainly agree on the issue of agency capture. And the marriage of, government and corporate power, and how basically that is a fascistic element. He and I certainly agree on that. On the other hand, I don't understand how that is married to his belief that, as he says, he's a free market capitalism guy.
That's exactly what I said. He LARPs as like an economic populist, but then if you he's like, corporate capture. But then if you take a look at his economic policies, he's like, well, how can you be free market? But also, this is like a libertarian delusion, which is the idea that collusion between the state and corporations is anything other than the free market. That is the free market. Whenever you don't have regulations, that's what happens every time, obviously. In a free market, they will immediately seek to collude with the most powerful local institutions. And if there is no government, they will become the government.
I read the other day that his description for how we're going to handle climate change is with the discipline of the free market. So, yeah, Bobby and I have a very different view.
Yeah, he went on Jordan Peterson's broadcast and agreed with him on that and said that, and Jordan Peterson is actually in the pocket of oil lobbyists and has channeled their misinformation in terms of climate change. And for Robert Kennedy to go there and agree with him is pretty egregious, especially when considering that he has a pretty long career of defending environmental rights, a lot longer than, I've been alive even. So very, very strange choice of words there. I don't know where he got that from. But people are correctly pointing out that he's done a lot of weird things. He gained a lot more prominence in recent years through anti-vaxxer conspiracies, through those circles, QAnon and whatnot.
You could actually see Marianne right there going like, oh, here we go.
Of the some of the writing that has been conducted on your campaign so far have also had a little bit of, not necessarily claiming that you're an anti-vaxxer, but definitely there is some questions about that. What are your stances on vaccination?
Well, the thing I do agree on is that I don't think pharmaceutical companies, I don't think that insurance companies should be dominating our, whether or not we have health insurance. I don't think pharmaceutical companies should have the dominance they have. I don't think gun manufacturers or big oil or big chemical companies or big food companies or defense contractors should be dominating our policies. I think too often, obviously, the profits of pharmaceutical companies are placed before the actual health and well-being of the American people.
So this is obviously true, but that's not a vaccine thing. That's a pharmaceutical company thing. It's perfectly sensible to be anti-big pharma, but usually when the right says they're anti-big pharma, what they mean is they're anti-vax. And when people on the left say it, they usually mean they're anti-big pharma, right? People on the left tend not to be anti-vax. That's one thing that there hasn't been like some weird horseshoe theory crazy like parallel on, which is for the most part, people on the left are pretty consistently okay with vaccines. But obviously that varies. Like Jimmy Dore is anti-vax, even though he pretends that it's anti-big pharma. There's variance.
In no other advanced democracy do they lack universal health care. So you take the top.
Oh, yeah, initially, Luxander. Yeah, it's so weird to remember, but like 10 years ago, the whole anti-vax movement, not the whole, but whatever, was like hippies. It was like hippie, you're not going to put your drugs in my body, thing. And like very far right religious extremists, like Christian scientists who don't think you should put any kind of medicine in your body, that kind of stuff. Yeah, new age medicine crap. And it's only recently that it's become this like far right thing, this obsession. Wait, I thought hippies love drugs. A interesting contradiction in the hippie, new age community is a weird willingness to engage in some, but not all, chemical consumptive practices. Definitely varies.
5 pharmaceutical companies last year alone, and their profit was $80 billion. Meanwhile, we have people rationing their insulin in this country. We have people who are putting GoFundMe pages on the internet to pay for life-saving operations.
This is all true. She is still dodging the question, of course.
For themselves and their loved ones. So no, I'm not a big fan. Obviously there's profit and then there's profiteering. And I believe that there's a lot of profiteering going on the part of Big Pharma. And I think there's a healthy skepticism that all of us should have.
But in terms of vaccine science, it feels like, to me at least, and I'm...
Okay, Hasan correctly recognizes the pivot. I'm proud of him.
The layman, I'm not very intelligent. It seems like the people that are supposed to be ensuring that every single person is inoculated. The science behind it seems sound to someone like
and
myself.
there's risk associated with every vaccine, and we know that.
Yeah, so overall, I feel as though it is an objective good. I mean, even Donald Trump with his Operation Warp Speed, this is one of the few instances where I feel like this was the government operating in a way that it was supposed to. And there was definitely negative consequences associated with that, but that wasn't necessarily...
Yeah, if you have beef with the pharma companies, the vaccine is the worst thing to go after, because that was actually like the biggest medical marvel ever. Seriously. Literally, like, a new disease has been identified. The government is going to like, you know, all of you try to make a vaccine as best you can. Go, 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 go. We're going to provide it for free once you do. Running around. And then like less than a year later, you know, in like no time, it's like, okay, every American gets free vaccines. It's like, holy shit, so quickly.
Vaccine injuries, but more so not allowing this vaccine IP to reach, poorer countries, shutting that off. Bill Gates got a lot of criticism, and people said, oh, he's trying to chip people, all the way, ranging from conspiracies all the way to like 5G waves, killing people or whatever. But the real thing that people should have been upset about in terms of Bill Gates's personal position on the vaccine was him stopping Oxford from releasing the patents and forcing the AstraZeneca vaccine to maintain its IP control, maintain its patent control, and the numerous amounts of misinformation that he spread in terms of how India was not capable of creating an adequate vaccine, and therefore it would be devastating and would create more vaccine skepticism, when India has and is continuing to supply pretty much 75% of the global south with their vaccinations.
I agree with that.
Do you feel like the profit incentive is what causes vaccine skepticism and other medical misinformation to thrive?
I think that there are two things we have to look at here. First of all, we have to have, there's a certain kind of healthy skepticism, certainly. But at the same time, we have to have a general trust in our agencies, the institutional forces which are pillars within our society. We have gotten to the point now where the skepticism has become cynicism, and it is too much. The system is too saturated because we have to have enough trust in these agencies. Now, whether it's the CIA or the CDC, it's sort of the same thing. It's like, do we trust you people? So
it's also about like informed trust, right? So I think that cynicism with the CDC is okay if the cynicism was like, hey, I think that the CDC has a degree of corporate capture with like big pharma, and I think that their motivations might be skewed sometimes when it comes to profiteering. That's one. But then when your cynicism has gone to a point where you're saying, yeah, like actually the vaccines are all ineffective and they're all going to kill you. Guys, there is a significant portion of the country that believes that the vaccine is killing a bunch of people and that it's like basically deliberate. Can somebody explain to me why anyone, the US government, big pharma, who whatever, would want to just randomly kill a bunch of people in this country, thereby having fewer voters and customers and everything's why would they do? Because that's like stupid cynicism. That's like the conspiracy bait right there. I don't think it's conspiratorial to say government institutions tend to be favorable to big corporations because, like, you know, look at history. But if you're running it to the point where it doesn't even make sense anymore, you know, it's about informed skepticism. You know, you're right, Crane. They don't understand how society and incentive structures work. They just don't get it.
Have to look at the fact with the CDC as well as others, to what extent did their behavior play a part in some of the distrust, not the unhealthy conspiratorial stuff, but some of the healthy questioning, like what was going on here. And I do believe that during COVID, there were people who, most of whom probably with the best of intentions, did not trust the American people to have a more honest conversation. And I think that...
I don't know how much I believe. I think for the most part, the messaging from the CDC and the pharma companies was pretty responsible. As always, when it comes to like a global pandemic that everyone is talking about, a few people are going to make inaccurate or like overly enthusiastic arguments for the vaccine, its safety, its efficacy. But I think the general messaging was fine. The only example that I can think of was the time that Fauci and the CDC panicked and they were like, hey, don't buy a mask. You don't need a mask. But that's because they wanted to have enough masks left over for frontline workers. And that was dishonest, but it wasn't because they didn't trust Americans. It was because they needed masks, right?
The transparency is always a good idea, because let people be smart enough to figure some things out for themselves. So I think
Like
there
what?
was some ways in which some skepticism was almost stimulated by a lack of transparency. Yeah.
I mean, I think epidemiologists run a tightrope whenever they talk about any kind of prevention with respect to further spreading a virus. And yeah, I mean, there were certainly issues with the original communication and how it spread.
And it was a
like
moment
there was
of panic.
There was definitely a lot of people that thought that, I mean, it was mostly fomide spread. I myself included, alongside many others, thought that you were supposed to like wipe off your groceries and whatnot. But ultimately, I think that again stems from their interest in being as protective as possible over a novel coronavirus that is ripping, especially the elder population to shreds. Yeah. So I think I give them a lot more
I think
leeway
as
with
I
that.
said,
Another thing people need to know is that if a virus is new and we don't know everything about it, there is literally no way to not say stuff that will later end up being wrong, right? Like if all we know is that it spreads through the air and like this and that, the other, like people are going to say stuff like, do this. And then later it turns out, well, maybe we didn't need to do that. But like, what were we supposed to do then, right? Like, you can't know everything right off the bat when you don't know what the threat is. You have to be kind of careful from the get-go, Yeah, nobody actually wiped off their groceries. Like, everyone I knew did that once, and then they were like, wow, that was really annoying. I'm not doing that again. Then they just live with it. Yeah, that. He is purring so hard right now. He is such a cute little baby. You are so cute.
vast majority of them over there, I absolutely believe that's true. Absolutely, I agree with that.
Yeah, but I don't necessarily agree that it's more transparency that would stop, naysayers and people that have generated and have a genuine financial interest in spreading COVID misinformation and then even farm their own alternative products. I don't think that would have stopped.
Can be true. Both can be true.
Okay. What else to talk about? So that's
nothing's going on or anything.
My whole family still wipes down everything, including groceries. Haha. Holy shit. Better to die a free man than live as a slave. Oh my god.
No, there's a well, actually, there is a lot going on in the world, but I do feel as though this has been a relatively less interesting cycle for the election. I think people were way more tuned in, and I say this only as like a media person, I guess, as much as I am not really a media person. I analyze the way that at least my generation is looking at like elections now, and they do find Joe Biden to be old. They find him not to be a very inspirational figure. A lot of people are complaining about his age and whether he's capable of running again. And the Democratic Party has completely shut off any kind of left-wing opposition to that or any kind of person from running against them, even though I'm a firm believer that even if someone is not necessarily has a shot at winning, I think that healthy debate is good and has the capacity to maybe even shift the incumbent on certain positions.
Okay, I gotta say, I don't watch Hasan on my off time because I'm usually doing literally anything else. But the only times that I've really seen anything from Hasan in the past, 2 years has been because of Ukraine. And every time I saw shit from him was because people were like, oh man, he said some dumb stuff now. But I've agreed with basically every single thing he's said. And I think it's actually a pretty important reminder on the value of understanding that usually when you have disagreements with people who are on your side, they're not that substantial, at least not as substantial as they may seem, right? Because that's why a lot of people don't like me, A lot of people see clips of me being somewhat disagreeable or like it's some edge case thing or some minor disagreement. But for 99.9% of stuff, I'd agree with pretty much anyone on the left when it comes to most issues. So yeah, I guess you have to be careful to make sure you're not being shown someone's worst takes only. I know he's going to talk about Ukraine later on. I'm sure I'm going to disagree with that, but all the same, right? That doesn't mean there's no value in what Hasan teaches people at all, It's not like he doesn't it's not like he does this radical pro-Kremlin Jimmy Dore-esque thing, He's not a MAGA communist or whatever. There are so many worse places to be. I like him because he's young and funny, lol. Hey, if he's young, I'm young.
Bernie Sanders did that with Obama's second term. I think that was good. Do you feel as though the modern Democratic Party is losing the younger population of voters that feel like Joe Biden is not fulfilling his campaign promises.
Yeah, and I think that even what you just said was repeating their narrative. Even someone who doesn't have a shot at winning, the person who gives a robust progressive agenda right now, offers a robust progressive agenda, is the person who is articulating what the majority of Americans want. The majority of Americans, both Democrats and Republicans, want universal health care. The majority of Americans, both Democrat and Republican, want tuition-free college and tech school, paid family leave.
As I understand it, the youth turnout rate is increasing substantially, but I don't think it's because of Biden. Young people are turning out more to vote, but not because of Biden. It's because they're afraid of fascism, right? Like we can see right here, state by state youth turnout votes. Like Michigan, 2014 was 15%, 2018 was 32%, 2022 was 36%. And like you can see, it seems like there's an overall turn up since before Trump. Whereas like over here, it's all in the like the 10 to 30 range, and over here, it's been brought up a decent amount, I think. Though these are for midterm elections, not for presidential elections, so I'm sure the data would look different there. I guess they found the 2018 midterm more important than the 2022 midterm. That makes sense. Yeah, but it's to be clear, it's not because of Biden. Biden is not why this is shifting. I have not met a young person who liked Biden. I've met young people who thought Biden was better than they thought he was going to be, and I've met young people who thought that Biden was an overall good, like net good, but not people who really, liked him. The way I saw young people do with Obama, not that much, but somewhat, back when I was younger, because he was, of course, I was in high school when he first became president. So, yeah.
A guaranteed living wage, etc. So they are so institutionally resistant to a robust conversation and allowing a person who is a real progressive to have that. So, every time we repeat that, that's just chopping their wood and carrying their water. So, of course, it's boring because they're saying, well, this can be just in a little corner over here. Of course, she's not serious. Whereas really someone articulating progressive views right now is the only serious candidate. Serious about climate change, serious about the war machine, serious about healthcare, serious about what is going on. That's what's serious. So, yeah, it's boring because the real truth is being suppressed. But when I say the real conversation of what's actually happening in people's lives is being suppressed. But you know what it is? It's a fake boring. It's like when Martin Luther King talked about positive peace and negative peace. He said negative peace is where there's no outright conflict, but there's underlying tension and anxiety. You say it's boring, but that's just because underneath, what's rumbling underneath is people acquiescing, giving up, feeling numb, and this kind of emotional decline. And that's also one of the reasons why I feel young people are ready for something more and aren't buying into, well, she's a long shot or she's just maybe she could move the conversation. This is their lives. And I think that those of us who are progressive need to say that. I don't care. Maybe you don't like me for whatever reason. Whatever. For these narratives that are spun or kooky, wacky, whatever, which is, I don't think there's anything kooky or wacky about 68,000 people dying every year from lack of health care, 18 million Americans unable to fulfill their prescriptions, 85 million under or uninsured Americans. And no, I have no crystals in my books or in my home or in my lectures. So if people can't see through that disinformation,
I love crystals. I have.
Good.
I don't know where they're at. I wanted to ask.
Hasan's like, I understand your argument about taking this seriously, but at the same time, I'm not going to drop the crystal mommy thing.
Your opinion, but you're not
kooky if you have them in your house.
Sexism. That's why I do have the OP buff of being a dude, so they don't really. I don't get hit with that. Thank you for saying it,
sir, dude.
Yeah, that's just But crystals are great. Okay, so I didn't realize. I mean, I thought that you were a crystal mommy, is what people are calling you in a not bad way, in a good way.
Well.
It wasn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, well, but it has been used to minimize. Let's not kid ourselves.
Okay. All right. Well, I didn't realize that you were you had no interest in crystals whatsoever.
Well, I think they're pretty. I mean,
okay.
I certainly think they're pretty.
All right. Well, I mean, look, I'm honest. I had to say it, Chad. I know Chad is like, why did you say that to her? Well, I mean, like
It's good.
I've succumbed to the media narrative.
I'm a big girl. I can handle it. We can talk.
I've succumbed to the media narrative myself. I mean, there's more I want to talk about. So there's obviously a lot of issues, and you're very good at communicating some of these problems. But I think, and I'm not going to carry water for the DNC, the Democratic establishment, or Joe Biden here, but I think Joe Biden also did a relatively decent job communicating some of these problems when he was running in opposition to Donald Trump. But the Democrats consistently tell me that they're unable to overcome institutional hurdles. You said that you would need you would also need a favorable Congress.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
So some of the hurdles, for example, are the likes of Kyrsten Sinema,
You are chopping wood and carrying water for them.
No. I have my opinion on how to deal with that sort of thing. I'm asking you how you would deal with it.
So,
yeah.
For instance, you said that the president was very good at articulating this before he ran, and even to some extent while he's there. So let's take two examples. One was he said he would raise the minimum wage, still at $7.25 an hour. We have 1/3 of America's workers who live on less than $15 an hour. Half of them cannot find a place to live. In most major cities, a living wage is $24 to $25 an hour. So the president achieved that for federal workers. Great. And then he wanted to put it in the COVID relief bill. And guess what stopped him? The parliamentarian. Now, let's be very clear here. Republicans do not let something like the parliamentarian stop them if they want something done. When the parliamentarian stood up to George Bush fired the parliamentarian. So President Biden was, can't do it because of the parliamentarian. BS. Secondly, the president says,
I completely agree with her on this one, 100%. Liberals will be like, well, we can't do this good thing because that would violate this little thing because that wouldn't be nice. They'll fold their arms, and then fascists will just bowl through and do it. You can't win on terms like that.
And he said when he was running, and he said since, that climate change is the existential threat to humanity. Absolutely. And he has put some healthy investments in green energy into the Inflation Reduction Act. The problem is he approved the Willow Project, an $8 billion oil extraction project on the North Slopes of Alaska, which completely nullifies all the benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act in terms of the green energy investments there. Plus, he has given more oil drilling permits even than Trump did, plus the $858 billion defense budget, given that the defense establishment is the single largest institutional emitter of greenhouse gases. So the president is very, it's a playbook, which I'm sorry if this offends anyone. It started with Obama, and it's that the Democrats have perfected saying the right thing, saying what we want to hear. And it was just fine until you notice what they did. And then too many Democrats go, poor baby, he couldn't, and for excuses when it's something which if a Republican had done, we would have screamed bloody murder. And the president, Kyrsten Sinema did not force the president to approve the Willow Project. And Joe Manchin did not force the president to not fire the parliamentarian, and so forth, and so forth, and
I
so
agree.
forth.
Good.
I agree with everything she said, so I can't even respond to it much. It's true. Yeah. Okay, but all this is true, though. Why are we reviewing this? Because I want to review it. Because I choose to. Because I'm a free man.
Your opinion on this is identical to mine.
Good.
I've said
I love people
damn near the same things. I think that as far as the IRA goes, I think that there was certainly a lot more that the Biden administration could have done.
Would it have been possible for Obama to overcome McConnell when he tried to do stuff? Okay, for me, the biggest thing, like the most obvious example of Democrat abstemiousness that should be remembered for all time as like the ultimate like XXX super ultra X-rated pornography of Democrats getting cucked was the Supreme Court. When Obama was nearing the end of his second term and they lost a Supreme Court justice, and Obama put forward candidates to be voted on the Senate, and the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell looked at them and said, "No, I'm just not going to table these for like 8 months." Now that's him failing to do his constitutional responsibility. As far as I'm concerned, at that point, Obama should have like said, well, then we have like, this is sedition. I mean it. He should have been arrested fully. Yeah. Literally, it's like the system literally cannot function if you can just hold seats like that while waiting for your guy to come to power. Yeah. Should have been arrested for seditious activity. By the way, that's not even me being crazy. Sedition definition, U.S. law. To conspire, overthrow, or destroy by force the government of the United States, not that one. To oppose by force the authority of the United States. To prevent, hinder, or delay by force the execution of any law of the United States, or to take, seize, or possess by force any property of the United States. Now, by force has varied in legal definition before, and depending on whether you want to go by this means by gun, or this means by like forceful use of your power, I don't care. They should have locked him up over it. Let the courts decide. Don't give a shit. Charge him with everything in the book. Charge him with high treason. I don't care. Let him argue his way out of the baby booster seat before the a short walk and a long drop. I know, what was it? Long walk and a short drop. I don't care. I don't give a shit. It's insane. And by the way, guys, thanks to that 6-3 court, now the high ultra wizards that control everything in America with no oversight whatsoever, it's 6-3 conservative instead of 5-4, which would have made a huge difference in some cases, though not enormous amount. Obviously, isn't it crazy how if Hillary Clinton won back in 2016, the court would be 6-3 liberal? Anyway, the point that I'm getting at is that if the Democrats were serious about protecting this country from the denigration of our democracy, Mitch McConnell should have had 50 handcuffs on him by like day's end the moment he pulled that shit. It is a dereliction of his constitutional responsibility as the Senate Majority Leader. He puts forward the candidates to be voted on. It is not. He does not have the single and sole authority to hold up the entire process of Supreme Court appointment.
And I think that potentially the president has more power to influence legislation than just sitting back and offering a incredible accomplishment to a Green senator like Kyrsten Sinema. And I think that as president, you would have powers to be able to
absolutely
persuade naysayers in your inside of your caucuses, inside of your Congress. Do you have any opinions on what you would do different?
Well, all of those things certainly that I just said.
Not just the Senate parliamentarian. I'm talking like, because there's beyond the Senate parliamentarian hurdle that was basically self-placed.
That's just on one issue.
Yeah, there are, well, even on that particular issue, the $15 minimum wage, there is always a rotating villain in the Democratic Party. A rotating villain could be Joe Lieberman in the Obama administration. It could be Kyrsten Sinema. But then before we are done with Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, let's say that they are reasonable. There's Bob Menendez. There's Maggie Hassan. There's so many other senators.
Hassan?
And even depending on what the House of Representatives looks like, there could even be a caucus like the Problem Solvers Caucus, like
Listen,
the centrists
no
that
matter
could.
who becomes president, he or she is hoping for a House and a Senate who is aligned with their agenda. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, it really makes me squirm the way we make excuses for Democratic presidents. Republicans don't do that. Republicans have more spine with they don't care if it's a Republican president. You didn't do it right. So I'm not interested. I think we need to hold our politicians more accountable, particularly as Democrats. So I'm not interested in well, this is why he didn't, and this is why he poor baby couldn't.
I have, once again, I have my own opinions on how to deal with that. Right. I'm asking you what you think would be the best way to go about it.
In many things, you can do executive orders. In many things, it has to do with who you appoint as head of agencies. Let's give an example. Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin did not force President Biden to nominate as our Secretary of Defense a former board member at Raytheon. He's in there with it. I'm sorry. Okay, so there are many issues like that. The Biden administration could, if they chose, exercise marching rights to lower some drug prices. So there are some ways in which Joe Manchin has stood in the way.
Sounds doing pretty good. I agree with pretty much all of what they're both saying, to be honest. Talk about Supreme Court immigration reparations. I think, given the tone of the discussion, I feel like I can safely say that I would agree with them on all of these subjects. So I'm going to skip ahead to Israel-Palestine to see if anything funny happens. And after that is Ukraine.
Another thing that we would probably disagree on a little bit is maybe foreign policy, but especially as it pertains to Israel.
Okay.
So Israel is America's greatest ally, according to both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. I want to hear in your own words how you deviate away from the Democratic establishment on that front.
I do deviate from the Democratic establishment quite a bit. First of all, let me say I am Jewish and I am a lover of Israel. But there is at this point the furthest right government that there has ever been in Israel. The settlements are illegal. The occupation is illegal. And the blockade of Gaza is wrong. Now, that $3.8 billion in military aid, there is a memorandum of understanding. So that's there unless there is an act of Congress to pull that back until 2028. However, the president can, and as president...
Thanks, Obama.
Pardon? Yeah, thank you. That, as president, I would absolutely, and could, by the way, the power would be given me, to insist that money not in any way be used in a way that transgresses human rights as we stand for them or purport to stand for them.
I don't think that can really be done. Putting like earmarks on huge cash donations like that, like, oh, don't use this for bad. I don't know how much that ever works. The problem is, like, it's not just the weapons that Israel has. It's that, let's be real here, okay? Israel's culture is just rotten. You can go over there and it's like, ask people on the street, like, hey, do you think that Palestinians are like rats or vermin? They're like, yeah, dude, yeah, man. Like seriously, you take a look at polling data when it comes to stuff like that in the country. Like, it's not just the government. It's that Israel itself, the population of Israel, is as like callously, indifferent towards the life, not just indifferent, but malicious towards the lives of Palestinians. It's a broader issue that needs to be addressed. It's like addressing, It's like addressing racism in the United States. It's not just you pass a bill, more has to be done than that. A lot more. Personally, I think that international force to secure the protection of the Palestinian people would be a pretty obvious thing, right? We intervened to keep Serbia from genociding all of the Kosovars. But obviously, we can't do that with Israel because they're an ally and a nuclear power. By the way, like, nobody in the government, like the administrative state, not the politicians, actually thinks of Israel as an ally. Israel constantly spies on us, does OPSEC like checks for our influence, and does like psyop shit on us. We are not allies at all. We don't, we don't treat each other that way when it comes to the actual like engagement of our departments with each other.
And as we should stand for them with any ally.
So what are your boundaries as it pertains to Israel? Like, do you consider Israel to be an apartheid state, or is that a bridge too far? Do you think that criticisms of Israel from the like...
Israel is objectively an apartheid state. Disagreement on that is objectively incorrect. That is not a matter of opinion.
Of Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar are wrong or inconsistent, because this is something that the Democratic Party, again, has claimed. They instead of addressing massacres happening in Jenin or anything of that nature, will turn around and seek to punish their own members in their own caucus, people that have, familial relationships of the oppressed people.
I think that there are certain laws and certain rules in Israel which could legitimately be called apartheid laws. I do believe that it is legitimate that there be a safe haven for Jews. However, a country that is a safe haven for Jews should not be an unsafe place for others. And with the founding, the original ideal of Israel was that it would not be an unsafe place for others. And unfortunately, they're actually moving backwards at this point. And sometimes you tell your friends the truth. What Donald Trump did was he went with the far right on the issue of Israel. What President Biden is doing, which the corporatist Democrats are doing, is hands off. This is
not true. From the start, Israel was founded with the ethnic cleansing of the indigenous people there. The formation of Israel involved. There's literally a term for it. There were like hundreds of thousands of people were marched out of their homes. Nakba? Yeah. To create room and stuff. There was never a point where Israel was like a humanitarian project, or was like acceptable from a humanitarian perspective.
All of that, fear of AIPAC, all of those things that we understand. And I would be very hands-on, and I would be taking a stand for equally robust support on the part of the United States for both the security and the human rights of both peoples.
Okay. You say both people, so that's why I'm trying to still understand. The Palestinian population is, as you said, under conditions that could, by legal standard, be considered apartheid conditions. Are you willing to withhold what we consider aid, but is a defense contract?
As I just said to you, there is a memorandum of understanding. It would take an act of Congress to withhold the money until 2028. What I would do, what the president can do, is insist that that money not be used in anything having to do with settlements, anything having to do with the occupation, anything that in any way transgresses.
Yeah, so like keep doing the settlements, but like use the money on it. Yeah. Like they're going to listen, like we're going to audit them, and like, it's kind of like, to show how bad it is. Like the United States was generally a promoter of South Africa moving away from apartheid, like Nelson Mandela, the whole like push to end apartheid, the whole thing. Like the American government, people were largely in favor of that process, because by the 1990s, that level of open racism wasn't really, like, not to say America isn't racist, it is, but like at that point, that's a little cringe, even to Americans, that's a little cringe, I think. But then, like in the modern day, we still have apartheid in Israel, and we just sit there on it.
As human rights as we in the United States describe them.
What is to do with? What do we also do with the obvious? You already said it's illegal. The occupation is illegal, especially in West Bank. What is to be done with the already existing settler areas in the region?
We've got a problem. You've got a lot.
From the American perspective, too, because we are an incredibly important ally to Israel, obviously, and we do have negotiation power in the process. What
the U.S. president can and should do is make it clear that we believe, it's not even our belief, it is fact, those settlements are transgress against international law. It's interesting because when Obama was at Tel Aviv University. He did give a speech in which it was clear that he understood what was really going on there. What the problem was actually effectuating some of the views that he himself articulated. I know people. I know them in Israel and Palestine, and I know people here who do represent.
I'm pretty foreign policy dumb would be the ideal thing for a president to do with Israel. So obviously, as a politician, you have to work more carefully than an advocate. Like, I can say Israel's an apartheid state. We shouldn't support it at all. But like, a president can't just snap their fingers and make that happen. The best thing that you could reasonably do is start by acknowledging the breach of international law with these settlements and the human rights violations. And then essentially argue, like, Israel, our great friend and ally, has left these problems unaddressed for too long. We will no longer deliver them aid until these things are addressed or whatever. And then have like an international council or UN sort of like intervention to try to secure first an acknowledgement of the conditions of Palestinian people, fully documenting it, understanding it, recording it, then determining whether or not those conditions are improved, and then like additional steps that would be like towards the long-term security of their safety. There's no easy way to deal with any of it. Israel's not going away, and if it did just go away, it would cause like a huge amount of suffering as well. Like, I don't think a solution to all of this to go like, okay, well now let's deport all of these Jewish people. Like, I don't think that's right. The two-state solution is the only logical one, realistically, because the idea of like Israel allowing Palestinians to have a voice in their government would create like unsolvable, like at the very least right now, the ethnic divides are just so deep, maybe one day.
A next generation consciousness about that area. And I would gather them, and I would seek to harness that kind of consciousness here in the United States for an entirely new conversation. And I would make it clear the leadership of Israel would know, and I think the leadership among the Palestinians would know as well, that the United States stands for something which is far more enlightened and fair and just than what is occurring now.
What do you think about our treatment of Cubans and Cuban population, Cuba as a country, and the embargo?
It's so interesting. Batista lost. There was a revolution. Castro won. Get over it. That was a long time ago. And I think that, you've got, I lived through decades where the hold of Cubans who were so resentful because Batista, they had power in Batista. It was like, enough already. Now they have younger generations, their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. This embargo of Cuba is cruel. I think that a lot of Americans underestimate the violence of sanctions. The absolute violence and who they actually hurt. So once again, this is an interesting area, isn't it? Obama began to open it up. Then Trump closed it down. And this is one of the areas where we thought that Biden would reverse.
Yeah.
So no, open it up, let people travel, let people have economic relationships, live their lives and be happy. And if that's where Cuba is, that's where Cuba is. Cuba gets to determine what's going on in Cuba.
Okay. Speaking of sanctions, obviously there are other countries that are sanctioned as well, including Iran, North Korea, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and also Russia. What are your opinions on?
The more I do research, the more I feel like sanctions are just really dumb. I'm okay with sanctions on Russia right now because sanctions can be effective in cutting off war efforts. We sanctioned oil in Japan back in World War II. But a lot of the countries that we sanction are basically just like, let's be real here, are such like despotic shitholes anyway that I don't think it stops the war. Like, if we're talking about a country like Sudan, right? Do you really think sanctions are going to stop war in Sudan? Like, come on. Do you really think in environments where like child slaves are being rounded up from rural villages and handed like 50-year-old AKs that are like leftovers from the Cold War and told to kill it? Like, do you really think in this environment sanctions are going to do anything? No, the only thing it does is cut off like routes of communication, control, and access that might allow things to get better in this environment, Nothing, yeah, it's not going to get better, right? Like, for instance, why sanction North Korea? Do they think that like North Korea has like political prisoner camps that they want to torture and kill all the political prisoners, but they don't have the needles to do it? And then like, because we sanction them, they don't have the needles, so all these people are fine as long as they don't get the needles because of the like, what are the sanctions doing? Are we worried North Korea is going to like use the absence of sanctions to build a nuke? I just don't understand what the idea is here.
The ongoing invasion of Ukraine and what America's role is in the conflict and what some solutions President Williamson would have that is different than...
To be fair, technically the North and the South are still at war. Yeah, but like, not really. I mean, I know technically they are, but they're not at active war and haven't been for a long time. You know, just because they haven't officially signed it off or whatever. Not to mention, even if there was war between North and South Korea, you guys know South Korea would, like, eat them, right? Like, even if North Korea has, at most, a half dozen, like, nuclear ICBMs, which they don't, but if they did, like, South Korea would just tank that, and then a tide of hundreds of thousands of modern equipped... So, like, there's no, like, there's not really a conflict there. There'd be heavy civilian losses, though. Yeah, I don't want North Korea to nuke South Korea. I'm just saying that there's not really like a threat of disproportional engagement. The South gets scared when North Korea does rocket tests in the Bay every 5 months or so. Yeah, of course. But like, you've seen the rockets North Korea has, right? They're dog shit. You know why they're firing into the water? So nobody can see how off target they are. Seriously, that's why. They don't have ICBMs. Their tech is nowhere near it takes so much money and expertise to make ICBMs. Even like accurate local missiles require a lot of expertise that they just don't seem to have, and a lot of money too. Like, guys, think of it this way. Remember how corrupt it turned out the Russian military was? Imagine how corrupt the North Korean military is. Unlike the Russian military, which fought in Afghanistan and 2 Chechen wars recently, North Korea hasn't used its military for anything, apart from internal discipline and showboating, meaning that for literally like the length of a human lifetime, more or less, their military has not had any combat-trained veterans. How corrupt must their shit be? You know? Like, dude, do you think... Do any of their vehicles have, like, gasoline in them, or are people huffing that shit? I don't know.
And what Biden has done thus far. Do you agree with Biden on his handling of the invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces? Well, of course, I'm going to ask you about China as well in a second, but I want to...
So why do U.S. agencies say they have ICBMs that can reach anywhere in the U.S.? Because fear-mongering about foreign countries is what American agencies like to do the most. I think they showed off one video where they had a giant metal tube, but I would eat my hat if that turned out to be an accurate international or intercontinental ballistic missile. Ooh. Ooh. There we go.
About your thoughts on Russia first.
Well, first of all, because it's literally the news today, a place where I deeply disagree with the President Biden is on the use of cluster munitions. Bombs. Those munitions are evil. They are obscene. They are illegal according to 122 nations, and they should be according to ours. So my heart is really broken, and we should not be using cluster bombs. And I think Americans need to realize what they mean, because they have repercussions after a war is over. Children, other innocent civilians killed by them. They don't all detonate at the time that they...
Yeah, the main thing that shifted me on this is that Russia is already using them, because the problem with cluster bombs is that a bunch are left unexploded. But Ukraine is already, a landmine field full of unexploded cluster bombs, you know what I mean? So, like, the introduction of them to a conflict where previously they weren't there is one thing, but when half of Ukraine is already mined to fuck, I feel like, because they're like cluster bombing areas that are already flagged for being cluster bombed, like Eastern Ukraine and stuff. So it's not like civilians are just going to run through there freely as they have before. You know what I mean?
They're dropped and so forth. I will say this. No, of course, the United States does not have clean hands. Yes, the United States was, pushing too far east with the whole NATO thing.
Nope.
Yes, the United States, or no, I should say, we should not have had the Aegis missiles in Poland. However...
We should have had more.
This is where I differ from a lot of my friends. None of that, to me, justifies Vladimir Putin's invasion of a sovereign country. And to me, if you're an anti-imperialist, you're an anti-imperialist if the U.S. does it. And to me, I'm an anti-imperialist if Putin does it. And obviously, we need a negotiated settlement. Obviously, the only ultimate possibility is a negotiated settlement. Someone like the foreign minister of Denmark has said, let's get together, but it has to be not just Ukraine's allies. It's not a unipolar world anymore. It's a multipolar world. You got to get everybody. You got to have China. You got to have India, Brazil, and so forth.
Still kind of a unipolar world, to be honest, but whatever.
However, I think some people talk very simplistically about what it means to call a ceasefire. The United States does not have the power to just walk in there and say, hey guys, stop, okay? If you were simply if the West were simply to withhold all aid at this point, military aid, then the peace would not be the result. It would simply be the avenue by which Putin would crush Ukraine. So no, I'm not on with that. I would like to see it be a negotiated settlement in which Ukraine has any Ukraine to negotiate.
Yeah.
The problem with this, the people always say this, right? The problem with this is negotiate what? This isn't a complicated conflict from a moral perspective. Like what is there to negotiate? You know?
I think that I do agree that if the United States would withhold all arms from Ukraine tomorrow, that this would be absolutely devastating for Ukraine. I don't disagree with that. Except due to that reality, I think that they have a lot more power in the negotiations process in terms of like issuing a terms of ceasefire than, you know.
But what does that look like? I don't understand quite what that would look like. To whom? We don't have the power to dictate that to Putin. Who are you saying we're dictating those terms to?
That's why you have to have China at the table as well. But
also, ceasefires don't mean anything with Russians. They just don't. And it sounds like overly simplistic, but they just don't care. Russian military doctrine for decades now, and Soviet doctrine prior to that, has involved such a callous disregard both for the lives of your own and others' men that it like, and that's not a stereotype, okay? Like, military history, you look through it, oh wow, no, they really are like that, you know? They did the Minsk Accords, they did the second Minsk Accords. What did it lead to? Nothing. The ceasefire lasted for no time at all. It didn't even happen. There's just no reason to believe, you know, they'll call a ceasefire, the Russian troops won't respect it, Ukrainian troops will fire back, and then Russia will say, oh, Ukraine, why are you breaking the ceasefire? We didn't shoot, you did. Why even bother? Just leave the country. Just leave. Just leave the country.
Well,
ultimately,
Xi went to Russia. We were hoping for that. I was hoping for that. Xi went to Russia. He spoke with Putin. Zelensky said, hey, call me. We were all hoping, listen, I don't care who can come up with an answer to this. And we were hoping, and they actually ended up with these quite weak principles. So,
there was a 15-point plan negotiated in Turkey in the earlier version of the invasion that seemingly was a little bit more prosperous. Zelensky himself even conceded to pushing Crimea later down. To like a 15-year program for Crimea where he would like have.
Then they would have to do another war?
Another democratic vote on how.
Dude, do you really think that Putin would let Crimea be voted back into another country? That they would let Ukraine do like a proceduralist annexation, like through a vote? Also, can't you tell Russia's being disingenuous with the peace agreements if they're initiating peace talks right after doing the invasion? Like, doesn't that strike you as a little bit like, oh, maybe they're playing a game here? Why would they invade and then go like, oh, well, here's these like peace. Listen, we're pro-peace and we have these peace agreements and like, come on.
To best continue on with those negotiations. That all fell apart when Boris Johnson.
This is the 15-point plan that Hasan's about to say some right bullshit. Hold on. Boris Johnson did not like destroy peace talks for other countries. Zelensky was never going to accept a peace agreement that didn't involve the retaking of all of Ukraine. So none of this is worthwhile. That's total bullshit. The idea that Boris Johnson was just like, hello, mate, don't do the peace agreement, all right? And that just like Zelensky is like, oh, okay. Like, it's just ridiculous. It's always with people like Hasan, all the people in these talking about, it's always like the West is always the ones responsible, man. Holy, it's like all the time. It's like listening to far-right people talk about Israel and AIPAC, you know, like, oh, you know, this one time a big oil company did something that was kind of greedy. It was like, actually, that was AIPAC and Jewish people. It was like, well, was it? Was it actually? You know, is everything the West with you? Yeah, I remember these. It was like 1 month after they invade Ukraine. They're like, okay, we'll pull back our troops, but also we keep the Donbass and we keep Crimea, and you don't ever get to join NATO, and like a bunch of other concessions after they invaded, you know? And then you'll notice, by the way, that every single time you hear about how these attempts at peace were thwarted by the West, the ones who say they almost had peace, it's everyone but Zelensky. Isn't that interesting? Oh, Erdogan said they almost reached a peace agreement. Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, said they almost reached an agreement. Has Zelensky said this? No. Because that's the person who we're listening. They're the ones who got invaded, but it's like, oh no, we were so close to peace if it wasn't for that darn Zelensky who had just been invaded.
Hassan visited Ukraine, and I don't think that England has any sort of agency in this conversation beyond operating as a mouthpiece for the American State Department.
Everything's the West. Everything's the West. Everything's the West.
And there's that interview with Naftali Bennett and so forth. So
wait, hold on. How can he simultaneously argue that China and Turkey should have a right to like negotiate peace agreements, but England can't? Wait, what? So what, an authoritarian country that's like 2,000 miles from Ukraine, and an authoritarian country that's like 1,000 miles from, I'm way off the numbers here, but not a democratic country that's 2,000 miles off? Why not?
So, yeah, I mean, I don't think you have to excuse the United States to stand for the sovereignty of Ukraine.
Yeah, I'm just saying that like there was a
And
peace
I don't disagree
negotiation with a 15-point plan.
I don't disagree with that.
That's Russia and
Over a year ago, by the way. Move on.
Ukraine. You talked about multipolarity. So what is your opinion on the current administration dealing with China, and what would you do differently?
We need to walk back the Cold War talk. We need to completely shift the paradigm of foreign relations. You know, this
is that a Giga Chad Xi Jinping emote in Hasan's chat? Okay.
We skirt disaster. We skirt disaster when it comes to the environment. We skirt disaster when it comes to the economy. We skirt disaster when it comes to people's lives and healthcare. We skirt disaster when it comes to war. We absolutely must move from an oppositional adversarial role with other powers. Once again, like you and I both agreed, it's a multipolar world now. We're not the only superpower, and it's our own fault, by the way. It's our own fault. We squandered our moral authority. We squandered.
Nah. We're still the only superpower. Nobody else even comes remotely close. We're not the only power. We're not the only like regional hegemon. But in terms of like global military, cultural, and social power, we're still the superpower. We're so powerful.
Our military respect, and hey, we left a lot of openings for China to just walk right in there in terms of their.
I don't necessarily feel like it's a bad thing, to be fair.
No, I'm not even.
I think it's Dr. Han from The Good Doctor. Is it? Maybe. It's really small. I can't really tell. Is Dr. Han like Chinese in the show? Like obviously the name, yeah, but like is he from China in the show, or did they just know that Xi? I can't tell. The actor is Korean. Ah, gotcha. Okay. No racism moment. Well, to be fair, Dr. Han looks like a Giga Chad in real life with his face shape. So when all I see is a lantern jaw and somebody standing in front of the Chinese flag, you know, you could sell me on any narrative, really.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that too when I say it's our fault. Like, no, I don't have a problem with what you just said. Okay, but the point is now we need to find a way to move to a collaborative paradigm. We need it in terms of nuclear war. We need it in terms of climate change.
It's also the Soviet flag. Oh my God, it is the Soviet. I'm so stupid.
And we need it.
I'm looking at it through my OBS preview window. I just see like a blurry. Okay. All right, I'm so stupid. Because we were talking about China, so I saw red and the yellow, and I thought, well, obviously that'd be the... Okay. Just...
More and more every day in terms of AI. So we have to stop it with this. You know, I look at American foreign policy over the last 50 years as toxic masculinity writ large. Cowboys going out, guns a-blazing, so immature, so lacking in wisdom. We must learn how to wage peace, and we must learn how to have a far more humble and respectful relationship with other nations.
Okay. So you're in disagreement with the current foreign policy perspectives on China that seemingly is bipartisan, and it's like xenophobia, that China is bad, evil.
Well, there have been some efforts when you...
I agree about America being overly paranoid and xenophobic towards China. However, let's not pretend that China is not like gung-ho, cowboy, yaha. They keep threatening to invade Taiwan. They're like building fake islands in the South China Sea to extend their international borders until they can like completely cut off other trade. They're incredibly aggressive, far more so than we are presently. At least in rhetoric. What was the last actual war that China was in? It wasn't. Was it all the way back to Vietnam? There has to be one more recent than that. Yeah. They had a war against Vietnam, not against us in Vietnam. They had a war against Vietnam, but that was in the 80s. Oh, China, Vietnam War, 80s, 90s, 79. So right before the 80s, 79. Okay. So that would mean, man, for them it would have been like 45 years since they've actually had real combat. Huh, okay. All right. Yeah, there have been skirmishes with India, but not like a war. That's the flag of the Chinese Communist Party. I just want to finish the video.
Yellen was there and Blinken. I mean, I think they're making efforts for economic collaboration, which is necessary.
I mean, that's an ongoing thing, regardless of what American media or the State Department says. It's like inevitable that we are always going to collaborate with them. They're a massively valuable trade partner. It's more so just
modern China's military is very untested. One of the things in my efforts to learn a little bit more about military history, one of the impressions that I've been given is that more so than almost any other asset, aside from maybe logistics, one of the most valuable thing that you can have in any war is veterans. Because in any squad where you have a bunch of conscripts or recruits or new people on deployment, and you have like a couple veterans, the veterans will know so much more than everyone else around them that they will like lurch the whole group forward in terms of experience. Like they'll like yoink everyone ahead. And if you have no veterans at all, you just don't have that. And
saber rattling, in my opinion. But you differ on that front, is what you're saying.
Differ
from not me. I'm saying from the current administration. I mean, because I feel like those conversations, as it pertains to trade, are ones that are not necessarily changing attitudes in any meaningful capacity. It's more so a reassurance. It's not dissimilar to America's opinion on China being.
Does Ukraine have any pre-2014 veterans? Kind of no, which is one of the things that fucked them over. That was why like the Azov battalion and shit took prominence, because when Russia did like the proxy war shit in the Donbass, there was nobody to resist them apart from these like local like paramilitary groups like the Azov battalion that eventually got folded into the National Defense Corps. But there wasn't really like a Ukrainian military, at least not enough of one to meaningfully protect the country from something like that. Yeah. Well, yeah. After this conflict, the country will be full of veterans, so they have that going for them at least.
One state, a unified state with two separate systems. Whether it, with Taiwan, for example, which is there's always been since the Nixon era the American attitude towards China has always been like, yeah, we're not gonna do anything. We are no longer recognizing Taiwan as the real China. It's just autonomous region, while also simultaneously giving arms to Taiwan and trying to massage any kind of interest that there may be in the public. And oftentimes this is not dissimilar to the Arab Spring, real legitimate interest in emancipation or wanting to become independent, beefing up these different groups in a collaborative effort to utilize an area with historic conflict, simultaneously claiming that you're on board with it.
We're not using an area with historic conflict. Taiwan has been its own thing for over half a century now, and we have a defense contact with it. We don't exploit our relationship with Taiwan to like muscle in on Chinese territory or whatever. We just expect China to not invade them. I think that's pretty reasonable of them to not do that, if that's possible, if we could avoid that.
Due to trade relations. I feel like the trade relations stuff is, I got really convoluted there. The trade relations stuff is just the norm. That's always going to happen. But as far as our dealing with China as a partner, it seems you are on board with seeing them as an equal.
You've said repeatedly.
So, okay, here's a question that you can ask anyone who pretends that Taiwan is the front for some kind of imperialist U.S. venture into China. Why then do we not have military bases in Taiwan? Like, we have a defensive treaty with them. They're an ally of ours. We've explicitly stated that we will like defend them if necessary. Why don't we have military bases in Taiwan? The answer for that is because we're not using it as a bulwark. We're not. It's just not. We have people there, but there are U.S. troops in like every allied country in the world. We don't have bases. It's not based. While the U.S. no longer maintains military base in Taiwan, the country's military ties have deepened as China steps up pressure on the island, which it claims as its own. How about China just stop pretending Taiwan is itself? Like, can we acknowledge how delusional that is? That in China, you can get in trouble for referring to Taiwan as a separate country. You have to pretend that Taiwan is a subsidiary of China, even though they haven't followed Chinese law for like 70 years. They're a completely separate thing. It's completely delusional. Like to give you an example, okay? If you referred to Zimbabwe as British Rhodesia, you would be like 15 years ahead of the time compared to referring to Taiwan as Chinese Taipei. If you looked at Zimbabwe and you were like, oh, well, actually, that's British territory. It's actually called Rhodesia, not Zimbabwe, and it's controlled by Britain. You would be closer to the truth than if you were claiming that Taiwan was actually Chinese Taipei.
That the economic relationship is ongoing. War with China would certainly interrupt that.
Yeah.
So, in order to protect the ongoing trajectory of economic relationships with China, which is an important collaboration, we need to make sure that we walk back from this crazy cowboy talk, including that about Taiwan.
Okay. All right. Well, we that about does it, because your PR person was telling me. I mean, I think you did a great job. I this was not meant to be a contentious interview, regardless, because I think that we do agree on a lot.
I'm your fan.
Yeah, this is of course a unique situation overall, though, with the chat and everything. So
I can't read. I don't have my glasses on.
No, that's good. That's actually a good thing. I always tell people not to look at chat.
I can't read. It's going too fast. I don't have my glasses on.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
I'm never going to get an answer to this, man. Because whenever people want to talk with me about like the Russia-Taiwan thing, they're insane tankies. Hasan's not an insane tanky. I just don't get his like foreign policy takes. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I don't get it.